The trade deadline is right around the corner, and it's pretty easy to argue the Cincinnati Bengals should make a move. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day. Today, talking trade deadline and what the Bengals ought to do with the trade deadline looming, a crucial game coming up, injuries piling up, and some obvious needs for this team if they want to right their season, restore the aspirations that we had for them in the preseason, add an injection of talent that they sorely need. Whatever the justification, we will get into those angles in today's episode before we talk about how likely we think it is that a move comes to fruition amid reports from Diana Rossini and Jeremy Fowler that the Bengals are indeed active on the trade market. A surprise to me. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time, where you can save $20 on your first purchase of tickets when you create an account, get the app, and use code LOCKEDONNFL. James, trade deadline right around the corner. We spent some time talking about this last week, but here as we record on Monday, early afternoon Eastern time, about 24 hours away from that deadline, we have some new information, some new injuries, unfortunately, that should be pushing the Bengals in a certain direction. While all of the positions we talked about last week should still be in play for this Bengals team to look at making an acquisition as well.
And it's pretty simple as to why. Why should they buy? They're 4-5. Why? And we'll get to the injuries in just a second. Did you watch number 9 on Sunday? I watched number 9 on Sunday. Jake obviously did. If you're listening to this or watching, you probably did. Joe Burrow is one of the best on the planet. You could argue he can not even argue. I think the Bengals are going to be confident going into Thursday, even though they will be shorthanded somewhere. They're going to be shorthanded against the Ravens. And so regardless of what they do at the deadline, they're going to feel confident, I think, going into Thursday night. But that's why they should do something at the deadline, because they have about 82 different deficiencies that you could argue, oh, well, you could do something there or there or there or there. And the obvious suspects are pretty simple on the defensive side. But these new injuries, like you mentioned, kind of throw a wrench into things a bit. How do they address key needs now that we know that Zach Moss and Zach Taylor used the word indefinitely? I think he's going to be out for the year, is the initial indication that I received over the weekend. Regardless, Zach Moss is dealing with a significant injury. You can't bank on Travion Williams and Kendall Milton to be Chase Brown's backup. So there's one running back. Erick out for the season, torn ACL. Sucks. I think that's kind of the vibe that was around it, even though he was walking through the locker room. It just didn't feel good. And obviously it's one of the worst case scenarios for Erick. Well, now tight end. Do they look to address tight end? How does that impact their offensive philosophy? Because they've been this 12 personnel team a lot this year with this do-it-all, pun intended, tight end and Erick that's been able to allow them to do that. 2 key spots on offense, 2 key starters, and that's really what Moss and all the role that they played as pass protectors and in this offense that they were. They're probably done for the year. It sucks, and it makes it tough, and I think it opens the door to multiple trade possibilities, not just defense, which a lot of people are focused on, but on offense as well.
Yeah, like I said, the positions we talked about last week, the positions that were reported on last week are still applicable, or over the weekend or whenever those reports came out. But now with the Erick injury, with the Zach Moss injury news or information being what it is, and then seeing the performance of these running backs in pass protection on Sunday, there's a need there. If they had Samaje Perine on the team right now, and I don't think Samaje Perine is a great player or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but if they had that level of reliable replacement level veteran, you would feel better about the running back room than you do when you are talking about Travion Williams and Kendall Milton. Maybe Kendall Milton can step in and be a contributor. We don't know. We haven't seen very much of him. He was limited in his game action. Travion Williams did not do well in his opportunities in protection on Sunday. And Chase Brown, while there's still plenty of room for him to grow, and he had a great game overall as a playmaker, also left something to be desired as a pass blocker, whether it's mental mistakes or just physically not being up to the job. So not only do you need a player who can spell Chase Brown, because you don't really necessarily want Chase Brown taking 35 plus touches a game. And not that every game would be like that. The Bengals were well ahead in this game, but you want somebody to spell him. You don't want him on the field every play. Zack Taylor acknowledged that. He even said in his presser on Monday that they need someone who can take some of those snaps, whether it's running the ball or some of those other roles from Chase Brown. And so a clear need is developed at running back, such that Zack Taylor even talked about that in his presser, and the likelihood that they're exploring options there, whether it's trade or acquisition in some other path. But you certainly kick the tires, I think, in the trade market there. You see what's out there. And you're right, going back to where you started your speaking part of today's episode, James, the reason that you are looking to buy, if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, is that Joe Burrow is playing at his peak, and his peak is elite. His peak is a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. You do not have a Super Bowl caliber team around him right now in many ways, which is part of why he was frustrated despite a great game against the Raiders on Sunday that we're not spending a whole lot of time talking about this week due to the short week, due to the timing of the trade deadline. But Burrow played an awesome game. He's been playing really well, really since week one for the most part. And yesterday was an example of him elevating that further, looking a lot like LSU Burrow, elevating the team in those off-script moments for crucial plays and touchdowns in that game. And when Burrow's playing like that, and you have a couple of other key pieces, we've glimpsed the ghost or qualities that suggest that there are the bones of a good team there, but they've too often this year been making bad team plays. And one way to address that and to get better is find the acquisitions that can help you. And some of the players I'm sure we're going to talk about are players that we've talked about before, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, they should. They should be aggressive because there's a real. You said Super Bowl quarterback, and I know what you meant. Nick Foles everyone will say all these quarterbacks won a Super Bowl. No, Joe Burrow. There's a very real scenario where he's the best quarterback on the planet at the end of this year. He's been better than Patrick Mahomes this season. The only other guy that's been playing at Joe's level is the guy we're going to see Thursday night.
Yeah,
and Lamar Jackson.
Lamar.
And he's just a nightmare to deal with, right? And we can discuss that, but that's the guy you have. And so who's making calls right now? The Ravens certainly are, right? They added last week, and they'll continue to try. The Chiefs adding pieces. The Bills have added pieces. That's something that I know that the Bengals players, if you gave them truth serum, would say, oh, of course we should be more aggressive. Of course we should add. Of course it would be beneficial to us to add a piece. It's got to be the right piece, but a piece. And so I think that's where the conversation goes next. Is it defensive end? Is it defensive tackle? Is it cornerback? Is it running back? Is it tight end? Oh my goodness. It is a lengthy list. We will dive into that, including some possible targets coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need right now. Whether you're going to Baltimore on Thursday night, maybe you're making the cross-country trek to Los Angeles for Bengals Chargers. Game Time is the app that's going to make it so much easier to get into your favorite live events. Maybe it's the Jelly Roll concert on Monday night, which I just found out there's a Jelly Roll concert on Monday night. So, man, oh man, I wish I knew in advance, Jake, because guess what? I'd be going to see Jelly Roll tonight ahead of the trade deadline. Unfortunately, I'm not, but maybe you are, or maybe you just heard this and you're like, man, I got to go see Jelly Roll. You got to download the Game Time app. Game Time has all-in pricing, so you know exactly what you're going to pay for your seats. There's no hidden fees that are going to pop up when you go to checkout. They have panoramic views directly from your seat. And so whether it's Bengals tickets, NBA tickets, concert tickets to your favorite live event are much, much easier to come by with the Game Time app. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL, and get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL. Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
FanDuel has a great offer for those of you looking to get into some sports betting action this NFL season. We're halfway through the season, but America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, still has these great offers for you. Right now, a winning $5 bet on your first bet gets you $150 in bonus bets. And fun fact, the Bengals have been underdogs in 3 games this season. They were 6.5-point dogs to the Chiefs after losing to the Patriots in week 1. They were 2.5-point home dogs to the Ravens in week 5, and they are 6-point dogs this week as things open. 6.5-point underdogs, with FanDuel. If you think the Bengals are going to overcome those odds, well, $5 to get $150 in bonus bets right now at FanDuel.com, where you can also follow in-game stats, live play-by-play, and so much more. All the info you need in one place. Again, $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet with FanDuel at FanDuel.com, where you never can waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, Jake, let's dive into targets. And I still think we should start on defense, even though we've discussed that, simply because that's where people's minds are right now, is boosting this defense, giving this defense a little bit more. What's your ideal realistic trade candidate? And by realistic, I mean, obviously you would love Jeffrey Simmons in stripes. That would be great. I don't think that one's going to happen. And so we can be realistic with this. If the Bengals were to address the defense, what one guy would you pick ideally?
I foreshadowed this earlier. It's going to be a guy that we've talked about before. It's Calais Campbell. He is still playing at an extremely high level. He's on a 1-year deal. He's on a 2-6 team in the Miami Dolphins. He's not a long-term piece for the Dolphins, who maybe won't want to deal their long-term pieces. Maybe they see their 2-6 season this year as a product of their quarterback injury, and they don't think that it says anything about their long-term prognosis. But Calais Campbell, at his stage in career and his contract status, should be available. Maybe Emmanuel Ogbah too, if you're looking for other players from the Dolphins. But the one guy that I'm circling is Calais Campbell, who can help you in so many ways, is playing at such a high level, despite how many years he's been around in the NFL, and will be a jolt in the arm that this defensive front needs. We saw against the Raiders that a pass rush, when you got it going, can cure all woes on the defensive side of the ball. And Calais Campbell can give you both pass rush and the ability in run defense. Gives you a rotational piece on the defensive interior, where maybe the news on BJ Hill was better than expected, said Zack Taylor, but you don't know exactly what's going on there. They've been dealing with injuries at that position all year. So yeah, easy for me to just point to, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Calais Campbell as the #1 target.
Yeah, I think, man, oh man, my #1, because I do think he could be potentially a long-term fit, and is Azeez Ojulari. But even with that, and this is where we, at least I want to challenge the front office. Like, Calais Campbell still would be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not, like, let's say you're giving up a 5th for Ojulari. Why not give up a 6th for Campbell, or a pick swap for Campbell, where you're moving back from the 6th round to the 7th round? Okay. Of course I would do that. Like, those are the type of guys that you could go after and really could give you a shot in the arm from a pass rush standpoint. Ojulari has 6 sacks this year. In the final year of his rookie deal, would make a ton of sense. The Bengals have $9 million in cap space. They could absorb Campbell or Ojulari or both really easy. And we're talking about day 3 picks here, like probably late day 3 picks. Not a 4th rounder, but lower than that. So if that's the case, why not? And both guys certainly fit there. Do you buy the cornerback smoke? I think it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if I fully buy it. I think that they like some of these young guys, and not that they couldn't use depth, but I do wonder there how serious they are about looking at a veteran corner.
I was looking at some of the teams that are really doing poorly this year and looking for potential trade targets at the positions that we're going to be talking about, defensive line and potentially corner, because that has been suggested by Diana Rossini's report. I even looked at safeties in a couple of spots, just because they are rotating safeties more. The snap split between Von Bell and Jordan Battle, given there was a garbage time series in there, Jordan Battle actually outsnapped Von Bell on Sunday by 1 snap. And I think that's largely because of the garbage time situation there. But like, what about an Adoree Jackson kind of
Sure.
like rotational piece? He's not playing a ton for the Giants. Again, looking at the Giants there, looking for depth there more than necessarily looking for an upgrade. I don't know that you're going to find much in the way of upgrade, although I did notice that Kendall Fuller plays for the Miami Dolphins. And there has been interest there before as well. So you're looking at a couple of veterans there with the Miami Dolphins, Kendall Fuller and Calais Campbell, with a couple of Dolphins targets that could give you some potential instant improvements on that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. A lot of people would throw out Marshawn Lattimore. I just don't really see it. I think the guy that would make a ton of sense, it would just cost a lot. I mean, you're probably talking about a day 2 pick. JC Horn is someone that could be like a long-term piece. I don't know if Carolina would be willing to deal him. You're talking about a former first rounder. They exercise his 5th-year option. He's that type of guy. Seems unrealistic, but wouldn't shock me if they're looking at that level that you mentioned of corner. And can you find the right guy? It does feel like that there's more obvious defensive tackle or defensive ends, pass rushers.
Like,
and yeah,
look at the Panthers. If you want to get beyond JC Horn, who's the shiny thing on the Panthers, Mike Jackson, veteran corner, has been around for a long time, has played a ton this year. If you're looking for like a veteran corner piece to add to your depth or to give you some stability there, how about Mike Jackson? Or if you're looking for a pass rusher, even with the Panthers, Jadeveon Clowney, a bit of a shinier name, but another rotational piece kind of player that has been discussed as a potential trade target.
I'd be surprised on Clowney. I would like it, of course. I would be surprised just because they coulda, shoulda, woulda signed him in years past. Like, they had opportunities, including this past offseason. You could say that about Campbell too, of course. And so I don't know. I do think that one's interesting though. And the Panthers in general are interesting because of all the guys. Like, all right, we can open up the offensive box here. Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen. Like, they have guys. I don't think they're trading Chuba Hubbard. Obviously, he's performing at a pretty darn high level right now. I would be interested if they're willing to eat money with some of these guys, interested in any of those guys, because they could help you depending on what you want to do tight end wise. And so I think that's the balance here is what fits, what players are actually available. If I'm the Panthers, of course, Adam Thielen should be available. Of course, Miles Sanders should be available. And if it helps you get a pick, even if you have to eat some of that salary, why wouldn't you do that?
I was looking at running backs as well as we're talking about offense. Actually, I guess I'll wrap up some thoughts on defense. In a division trade, if the Browns are interested in trading with the Bengals, and I don't know if this is possible, there's so many players you could go for on this Browns team that have attractive, acquirable contracts. Zadarius Smith, one of those players, one of the shinier players. Dalvin Tomlinson, one of those players. You could go down the roster a little bit more for like the Shelby Harris kind of player, a veteran that we've talked about quite a bit in the past. A few defensive linemen there with the Browns you could talk about. Jermichael Hasty is a running back who is playing in a rotational role and has pass blocking experience this year. If you're looking for that extra piece and you're not looking for necessarily a high end, somebody to spell Chase Brown at running back, where he's also dealing with a minor injury. He has a bruise, according to Zack Taylor, and get a guy that has some pass protection experience. Jermichael Hasty was a name that I saw today. So there's a ton of guys out there at all the positions, even at tight end. The Saints, Foster Moreau, a guy the Bengals had interested in the past. There are a couple of tight ends out there that can fit into that Erick All kind of role. Foster Moreau stood out to me when I was looking at some of these bad teams as a tight end that they could look at as well. Not that I think they would look at any of these guys necessarily, but these acquirable contracts from bad teams and positions where they need help. These guys are out there if they're asking the right questions and willing to make a deal. And I think that is a bit that we'll have to talk about whether they can get over that hurdle, but probably some other players and positions we could talk about too.
Yeah, for sure. But I have a list of running backs. I think the juggle at tight end and what you do there is interesting. So we can do that. And then also address that question. How likely is it that the Bengals make a trade, acquire a player at the deadline for the first time since 2020 and just the third time in 50 plus years? We will answer that coming up next. Locked On Bengals is sponsored by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude. And along with your family and everyone that matters to you, you could take a moment to say thank you to someone in your life, including maybe your therapist, if that's someone you'd like to shout out. And maybe you have multiple people that you want to thank. Well, that's where BetterHelp comes in, because it's sometimes hard to remind yourself that you're trying your best to make sense of everything. And in this crazy world, that isn't easy. So take this as a reminder to send some thanks to people in your life, including yourself. If you've ever started about thinking, or if you've ever thought about starting therapy, well, BetterHelp is perfect for you because it's entirely online. It will fit any schedule. And all you have to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/locked on today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on.
James, we're going to get into whether a trade is likely. We'll also talk about what happens if they don't make trades at certain positions. We'll probably get into that a little bit more tomorrow after the deadline when we have some clarity on where moves have or have not been made. I'm still a little bit skeptical that they actually get a move done. I am willing to buy the reports that they are more seriously perhaps kicking the tires at this time of year than they have in years past, because there's multiple reports indicating that the impetus to make a move is very obvious. They have very obvious deficiencies and injuries that have added up. Another tight end, by the way, that I'll just throw out there real quick, Austin Hooper,
Yeah.
is a potential experienced tight end that can do a number of things for you, who could be available with the Patriots, I believe. But anyway, do we want to get into the likelihood? Is there anything else you want to cover before we get to that question and answer?
No, let's get to a few more names. I think you'll notice most of these guys are like Jeff Wilson Jr. for the Dolphins. He's just buried there. Like, is he a guy that could help spell Chase Brown? Maybe. And if you're the Dolphins, why wouldn't you be open to moving him? Because you have multiple guys ahead of him in that backfield. Khalil Herbert is another guy with the Bears. Kind of makes sense. I think Izzy Abanikanda with the Jets. Why not? If you're the Jets, why not? I know you're going for it. He doesn't play. Why wouldn't you? The other one, I already mentioned Miles Sanders, but the other one, and I can't shake this one, and it's because he hasn't played at all. He's been teammates with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Orlando Brown Jr. They love him, have a great relationship with him. And I don't know what happens Monday night. He was inactive last week. Maybe he's active tonight. The Chiefs play on Monday Night Football. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just sitting there. I don't think they trade Samaje Perine. I don't think that they are going to get rid of Kareem Hunt, given what he's meant to them. And Isaiah Pacheco's coming back. And they also like Carson Steele on a rookie contract. So to me, that one's just really interesting. Like, what do they do there? And maybe it just sorts itself out due to injury, but just another name that I would mention. But the other element here, I don't know if they're going to find the next Erick All via trade right now. And so how likely do you think it is that they kind of morph back into a 13 team or 13 team
11
where they're, or 11 team, excuse me, where they're playing 3 wide receivers and 1 tight end where we see some Drew Sample, and maybe there's still 12 some where Gesicki is that 3rd receiver. But that's basically 11. How likely do you think that is? Because if so, I could certainly make the argument that receiver is a pretty darn big need.
I think that they necessarily become less versatile with Erick All's ACL injury. He was the key to all of that versatility on offense. He was the key to their 12 personnel packages, their true 12 personnel packages, which were Drew Sample and Erick All. He was the tight end 1 in this offense. He was the straw that stirred the drink in a lot of ways. And I'm worried, honestly, and this is a bit of hyperbole. Like, I don't think it's at this level because Joe Burrow's playing at such a high level and able to make so many plays for this team right now. And Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still exist. And Mike Gesicki seems to be finding his footing as a reliable 3rd target in this offense. But I still have concern that losing Erick All could be a straw that breaks the camel's back on offense. And again, this is hyperbole, but let me explain it a little bit insofar as one of the things that makes him hard to defend this year is that versatility when he's on the field. One of the things that makes them hard to defend this year is that they can put him on the field and challenge teams a little bit more to match personnel, put more bodies in the box, and free guys up downfield, free up weapons on the exterior in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins when he returns. And we were starting to see Erick all grow into a more reliable downfield threat on his own as a receiver. We were starting to see that in the last few weeks. So I do think that is a big deal injury for this team. I, again, am overstating it a little bit. I don't think the offense is suddenly going to spiral out of control because of this. I think they can adapt, and I think they have to adapt. But that goes back to the heart of your question, James, which is, what does that look like? There's no true 12 personnel. There's no true 2 tight ends on this team anymore. The tight ends besides Drew Sample on this roster are receivers and big bodies. Tanner Hudson is not making the plays that Erick Hall can make for you in the blocking game, period. And neither is Mike Gesicki, and neither is Tanner McLaughlin. Those guys are all receivers in tight end bodies. So necessarily they will change to some degree unless they surprise us and add one of those tight ends, the Austin Hoopers or Foster Moreaus, who can kind of do both of those things and could go into that Erick Hall role for you a little bit. I don't think that's likely though, James. And so you could easily see the offense shift gears a little bit here and make another adjustment in the middle of a season.
And if that's the plan, then like a guy like Thielen to me is just like, oh, well, no brainer. Like literally wants to go to a contender. They need reliability there. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But having another option would make sense. Also, as we're recording this, Baron Browning, someone I hope we might have mentioned it last week, but the pass rusher for the Broncos going to the Cardinals for a 6th round pick. So it just gives you an idea. And he hasn't been productive this year, hasn't played much, but he's a good player. Has 9.5 career sacks, a bunch of pressures over the past couple of years in 22 and 23. And so a 6th rounder going to Arizona for a 6th round pick. So that's where the market is. I mean, think about it. Josh Uche is a really good, like a solid rotational pass rusher, 6th rounder. Now Baron Browning, 6th rounder. Azeez Ojulari or insert Arden Key or whatever, whoever. I think you could get him for a day 3 pick here, and it just kind of cements home why it would make sense to bolster this pass rush.
They have an opportunity to make the team better at multiple positions right now. They honestly, if this was another league, if this is the NBA or baseball or whatever, like another league where trades are more likely, the Bengals are adding multiple players right now if they're a competent franchise. I would argue that they should be adding multiple players right now in the NFL, where player trades in season are much less likely. They need help on both sides of the ball for injury reasons on offense and to try to keep some of that versatility, I would argue, on offense and on defense, just because they need an injection of talent primarily on the defensive line. But if they were to add a piece, a Kendall Fuller to the secondary, you would feel more confident in that secondary too, where Mike Hilton is playing really well and Geno Stone has been steady the last few weeks, but they're still looking at safety and rotating at the other safety spot. And Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner are still giving up plays on a week-to-week basis. So multiple positions, multiple levels where they could use an injection of talent. The only position we haven't really talked about, well, I guess there's a couple: offensive line, quarterback, linebacker, specialists. But that leaves a lot of spots where they could add players. And we've talked about a ton of players here that are reasonable to go after.
Yep.
That can make the team better. The question is so Azeez Ojulari, for example, apparently there's going to be some kind of bidding war there. Are the Bengals willing to go to that 5th round pick or the earlier round pick swap or whatever it is that would get that deal done? Not that I'm personally, you're more excited about Azeez Ojulari than I am. I think I'm not like thrilled. I think it would make them better. I don't think it's like a game-changing move. I don't necessarily see it as a long-term move. Don't have to debate that now. The point is, as an example, would they be willing to get that deal across the line if there are multiple interested parties? And would they be willing to outbid? This is a team that didn't trade AJ McCarron to the Browns many, many years ago because they couldn't get that 2nd round pick until it was too late, right? So that's where my skepticism comes from, James. Even if they are more interested this year and they are earnestly trying to make a move, can they get it done with their history and stubbornness when making these trades?
And what happens, in at least what I think happens, this is an organizational thing where Mike still signs off on some stuff. You're making an in-season trade. You're probably going to have to convince Mike Brown that it's the right move. And I think that's easier said than done. I think Baron Browning for a 6th-round pick would have made a ton of sense for the Bengals. I think it would. Now, Denver might have said, "Oh, well, we prefer to send it to Arizona anyway because it's Kyler Murray and it's a young team and the pick's going to be higher. At least we're banking on that." But still, those are the type of moves that can help, especially a team like this that should be in win now mode. And so hopefully Mike is willing to give the thumbs up. Hopefully Duke is on the phone as we're talking now. And hopefully they make a move or two. I do think that they're trying. Now the question is, and it's not like they've, let me into the room. What does trying consist of for the Bengals versus some of these other teams? And I think that part of it irks fans, but we just don't know. And until they do something, it's like free agency. We kind of expect something now because they've done things in free agency for multiple years. But we never really expected anything in 2017 because they never did anything. We need them to break that precedent, trade-wise, the same way they did in free agency.
You got to get creative and use resources to try to make your team better. And this even applies to the edge rusher position. You've mentioned Baron Browning and Josh Uche, 2'6'3", 240-pound edge rushers. Are the Bengals even interested in that kind of player?
Give me him. Can they pressure?
Point I'm trying to make here is
you
have to be more open to ways to make your team better sometimes. You also need to be aligned with your coaching staff, which is, an independent challenge and making sure that if you were to acquire one of these guys, there would be a role for them. But some kind of creativity is probably needed here for the Bengals, who we haven't seen make many in-season trades in their history. And we're suggesting they should. Now, again, James, I still remain skeptical. What odds do you give it? If you had to put a percentage on it, then we'll get out of here. If you had to give it a percentage chance that the Bengals make at least one move to add a player via trade, where would you land?
I think it's the highest it's been in my lifetime.
So like 20%
at the deadline, maybe a little higher. And part of it has to do with 9, man. You keep poking that bear, man. He's playing like an MVP.
He's playing great.
And literally, if he continues this, he's playing better than any of the MVPs in the past, Ken Anderson or Boomer Esiason. So can that continue? Maybe, but you're going to need to put a piece or two around him. So hopefully it happens. The other one, we didn't really talk about offensive line. Brandon Scherf is like cheap. Like, I know they would never.
They should, but that's so far. Yeah, there's a reason we didn't talk about it.
But I can't believe how cheap it would be, like cap wise, to where it's like, oh my God, like that's a guy you hire. Isn't he said to be a free agent? And then he's just gone.
Yeah.
And you get that comp pick back. Anyways, all right, let's get out of here. Hopefully we're doing an emergency trade show. Like they make enough emergency trade show between now and Tuesday's deadline. If not, we'll obviously be back after the deadline.
It's honestly part of the challenge that we didn't even have time to talk about. The trade deadline timing, again, sucks for the Bengals. Short week, 4-5 right now. That's their own problem, but short week to deal with, to try to bring a player in to make your team better in a critical game. Unlucky timing, but we'll see what happens. And as James said, if there are moves to talk about, we will reconvene. We will talk about those moves. We will certainly, at least at the very bare minimum, talk about them tomorrow after that trade deadline has passed. And until next time you hear from us, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.